All right. So the header says, do males and females respond to stress in the same way? This picture has a female. Talk about fight or flight. So what's my header about? Well, some people argue that Sellier's model best explains male responses to stress, and that for females, there might be a different pattern, and that would be what Taylor calls the tend and befriend model. So, our ancestral history, males were more likely to be fighting and hunting and doing those kinds of things. And so the fight or flight model might have really benefited males. Whereas in our ancestral history, females were more likely to be, rearing offspring, tending to children, maintaining friendships with the other females in the clan or whatever. And so the tend and befriend model emerged as Taylor's explanation for why women might respond a little bit differently to stress. So when under stress, Taylor says that women might want to go garden to that calms them down, or they want to hold their cat or their grandchild or their baby, or they might reach out to a friend and just want to talk on the phone, something like that. So instead of fighting or fleeing, women's response to stress would be to tend to things that need to be nurtured and taken care of, and befriend, build their network and stuff like that. Now, there's a lot of controversy in this idea that males and females respond to stress in different ways, especially as I explained the Selye model. I'm sure a lot of women in the listening group are thinking, I know, I've felt all those things. We all have. So I think what Taylor was trying to introduce was maybe a more long-term response to stress for females, that, on average, females handle that kind of chronic long-term stress by displacing onto tending and befriending. Now, we've talked a little bit about conversations between males and females and how they can sometimes be not matching. If it's true that males and females have different ways of dealing with stress, a stressed out male might not be able to fight with the source of his stress, so he might want to flee from it. And so he might want to, go bury himself in a video game. Or, if he's a 1950s male, maybe he wants to go sit in his study and drink a highball and go hide for a little while after they get home from work after they've had a stressful day, right? Females oftentimes, when they see a male retreat, they're like, oh, he's upset. Let me go tend to him. Let me go show him that I'm his friend and I will help. And that can be a big mismatch in male and female strategies because, first off, the female might want to go in and talk face to face, which we've already discussed is not necessarily the male's favorite way of sharing their innermost fears and concerns. But also, there might be a moment where the male might need to just flee, right? I need to be alone. I need you to not pursue me right now. And so an argument might ensue based on leave me alone, that is really a displacement of whatever the real stressor is from the day that the male isn't ready to talk about. And so I remember when my son was younger and he'd have, clearly he's upset. I mean, when he was a teenager, it's like, clearly he's upset. He has just come home and he's clearly upset. So here comes mommy who's going to fix everything, right? Oh, what's wrong? Nothing. Well, you look like you're upset. I'm fine, right? Like this stupid conversation, even though I've been teaching social psychology and I know these models since, I don't know, they were invented practically. I still, when it's your own male that you're chasing around as a female, you're like, come on, just tell me, let me take care of you. I will, befriend you. I will tend you. And he just didn't want it, right? He wanted to go into his little hidey hole and not really think about it, but maybe in his unconscious background noise, he was, kind of churning through the problem. But there was such a mismatch, and I always felt bad that he would be retreating from me. But then I thought, I know why he's doing it. Why am I chasing him? Like, why can't I just leave him alone? But it made me stressed to have him reacting like that. And so it would make me even worse, right? Like I'd want to follow him around. Are you hungry? Is there anything I can do? What's wrong? It was not productive. So I'm trying to give you a little life lesson about that right now. If a person tells you I don't want to talk about it, maybe give them a little space. That's all I can say. And it doesn't have to be a male or a female. If a person says I don't want to talk about it right now, and go, okay, well, when you're ready, I'm still here. So, and I will leave you alone. But this brings up the issue, how can we cope with stress? Whether our natural tendency is to fight or flight, or if our natural tendency is to tend or befriend, like, how can we cope with stress? There are people who approach stress from a problem focused perspective, where they try to change the situation. So let's pretend like the situation is that your commute is really long and it just takes you, an hour to get to work, and this is or school, and it's like it's really a stressor on your day, getting out in time, getting to work on time or whatever. It's really a stress on your day. If you take a problem focused approach, you're going to try and change the situation. So you might say something like, I need to move closer to my destination, or I need to find another way to get to my destination. So maybe I could find a quicker route, or maybe I could take the bus and I wouldn't have to be driving. What could I do to change the situation of sitting in my car, stressing out over being late? Like, how can I change this situation? What can I do to make this better? And really the focus is on making the situation different from what it is. With emotion-focused coping, you realize that you can't change the situation, and so you change your reaction to the situation instead. So maybe I can't move, and the bus doesn't work. So how am I going to make this commute in this car less stressful? So maybe I start listening to books on tape on my way to work, and so that it feels like less of a waste of my time. Like, a lot of textbooks now are available like that, where on your cell phone you can get it to read it out loud to you. So it does not have any kind of great drama to the reading, but at least so maybe you can make your commute also your textbook reading time. Or some people, while they're commuting, will use that as a time to plan their day, hopefully mentally, they're not writing it down or something, but, visualize the conversation that they have to have with their boss, or visualize those sales calls that they're going to make or whatever. So that now, instead of wasted time being irritated with the drivers around us, we can actually make it into productive time. That actually, I got to listen to a novel, or I got to listen to my textbook, or I got to think about my day and get myself ready for the day, and things like that. I hear a lot of people who say that their commute from work back home really is instrumental in them making that shift from their workday self to their home life self. And so they've really switched what could be a stressful situation into something that's actually an advantage. And so that's what emotion focused coping is about, like changing your reactions so that you can, I can't escape the situation. So how can I thrive in this situation? On average, males tend to be more problem focused and females tend to be more emotion focused when they're coping with stress, just on average. And then people who are individualistic tend to be more problem focused, and people who are collectivistic tend to be more emotion focused. So just sort of averages and differences. Within a collectivistic society, the males still tend to be more problem focused and the females tend to be more emotion focused, and same within, individualistic. So when we have stress, one of our goals is to be resilient in the face of that stress, right? A lot of times we talk about resilience being like that little weed who is able to grow in the crack of the sidewalk with minimal water. And like, how could we be resilient like that weed, where even as tough things come and stressful circumstances surround us, how can we still thrive? How can we be resilient? One factor that affects resilience is our explanatory style. So if you recall back, we've talked about this a little bit before in class. If you have a stressful event that's occurring and your appraisal, your explanation of it is that this is threatening to me. So let's say you're about to take a tough math test. You look at the math test and you say, oh no, I don't know how to do any of this. I'm so stupid. This will never work. I'm about to fail. This is horrible. Your response to this situation is that you're probably going to be distracted by how stressed out you are. Your response is so stressful that you're probably going to do more poorly on that test than you would have been if you hadn't made that appraisal, right? And we talked about this a little bit earlier when we talked about stereotype threat, right? The idea that, oh no, I can't do this. Now people are going to think that people like me can't do this. And then this whole thing becomes all this energy devoted to being upset. And that actually distracts you. If, on the other hand, you look at the situation as a challenge, right, where it's like, okay, well, I've got to focus. I know this stuff. I should be able to figure it out. I'll skip over any that I don't know right now, and I'll just go through the ones I can do, whatever. Then you have a person who's less likely to be distracted and more likely to be actually beneficially aroused by the situation, so that in fact they are more focused and they're more able to, apply their knowledge. So, the exact same situation can have different outcomes depending on how the person interprets the situation. It's all about how they're explaining it. Some people in their explanatory style are naturally optimistic and some are naturally pessimistic. So optimists, I don't mean Pollyannas. Pollyanna is an old character from a book that I've never read, by the way. But Pollyanna was so optimistic that she ignored reality, right? Like, you don't want to be a Pollyanna. Pollyanna would be like, I have this weird bump on my head. I'm sure it's fine. Like, don't get it checked out. I'm sure it's fine. Like, why would there be anything wrong? And just go about your business because I'm sure it's fine. That's not an optimist. That's a Pollyanna. An optimist is somebody who says, let's say you find a bump on your head, says, I'm sure it's nothing, but I'm going to let the doctor check it out. I'm sure it'll be fine though. Even if it turns out to be something, getting it checked early is going to make it curable, right? An optimist looks on the bright side. An optimist doesn't deny reality. A pessimist tends to look on the dark side. The pessimist says, if it can go wrong, it will, right? And it probably will. So pessimists have a tendency to blame themselves for anything that goes wrong. Optimists tend to blame situations whenever things go wrong. So what we've found is that pessimists have a much higher rate of coronary heart disease than optimists do. Some people are sort of in the middle. They're optimists about some things and pessimists about other things. So they're labeled neutral. So the pessimists have a much higher rate of coronary heart disease than the optimists do. Now, optimists aren't at zero, right? But you reduce your risk, or, I almost did a causal explanation. It's possible that you reduce your risk by adopting an optimistic stand, but it's also possible that optimism is a natural orientation to the world. It's possible that there's nothing you can do about your explanatory style, that it is what it is. There are a lot of models that would, in psychology, that are attempting to figure out how optimism emerges. There's the whole growth mindset movement that's really focusing on an optimistic interpretation of the situation and trying to teach people to have an optimistic interpretation. But it's possible that people are naturally optimistic or naturally pessimistic. And so you might be working against their very, personality traits by trying to teach them something else. So if it's a personality trait, maybe along with that personality trait comes, a lower likelihood of coronary heart disease. And that it really isn't about being optimistic. It's about having this constellation of characteristics that, the person just has. So it's possible that adopting an optimistic viewpoint will be helpful, but it's possible that it doesn't matter. And we really don't know yet. Perceived control. So if you feel like you're in control of a situation, it's less stressful than if you feel like random bad things are happening to you. So here we have 3 rats who are in identical crates with one exception. Well, I guess technically two exceptions. One exception is that the control rat does not have any kind of shock being delivered to its tail. It's just in the exact same crate. Everything's the same. So we can make sure that it's not something just about being in the crate that's, causing the outcomes. Then we have the executive rat on the left and the subordinate rat on the right. The executive rat is able to spin the wheel whenever his tail starts to get shocked, and it turns off the electricity. And it happens to also turn off the electricity for the subordinate rat. So the subordinate rat doesn't have any control over turning off the shock. He's dependent on the executive rat to turn off the shock. And what they found after putting the rats through these experiments is that the subordinate rats were much more likely to develop ulcers and high blood pressure and signs of stress than the executive rat. Having that sense of control over the outcome buffers the executive rat from the potential damage of the shock. Like clearly the shock by itself is not enough to cause these effects. The executive rat's effects didn't look any different from the control rat's different effects. So it's not, the shock itself apparently is not harmful. It's the lack of control over when they were getting shocked or being able to turn it off that made it harmful for the subordinate rat. So if you imagine yourself, a lot of times in life, like let's say you're a student, I can assign you whatever I want to assign you, and you don't have like control over whether you do it or not, but you do have control in the sense of like which classes you pick. In my class, I always like to give students like some choices about what projects to do, things like that, so you have a sense that you're doing something that's interesting to you, so that hopefully it's less stressful to be in class. I hope that's how it works out. Because I want my students to flourish. I want them to be resilient. I don't want them to feel like they're randomly being shocked on the tail. I want them to feel like they're having a good experience in their psychology training. So the effects of stress are reduced when a person or a rat believes that they have control over the duration of the stressful event. Social support also helps to affect resilience. When you feel like somebody cares, that somebody can help you through those rocky moments, it gives you more resilience. And it doesn't have to be like your parents or your romantic partner or something like that. If you have someone who you feel like provides you with the kind of social support that you need, resilience tends to follow. And so we find that a lot of people who are raised in very stressful neighborhoods or environments, as long as they have someone in their corner who, it could be a coach or a teacher or a prayer leader, or it could be any person, but if they're providing the social support that the person who's experiencing stress needs, it gives them that buffer so that they can be more resilient in the face of stress. All right, we're going to take a break here and we're going to come back and talk some more about social support. So I will see you in the next video.